Hi, my name is George Rogers. The lesson I'm about to demonstrate for you is, in my opinion, the most important lesson any child can ever learn. Now, I realize there's a risk in using superlatives, but if this lesson isn't the most important lesson they can learn, frankly, I can't imagine what would be. Because the principles in this lesson influence every thought and feeling that we have. And it also controls every choice we make and every action we take. And I believe that if children can understand the principles of this lesson early in life, it will give them much more control over their affairs than any other thing they can learn. It's also a great example of what I call character-based learning. It can be illustrated, demonstrated, and reinforced by several different science lessons. It can be used to help children understand events in history, why people did what they did, and why things happened the way they happened. The same can be done for literature and current events. And children can even be helped to understand things that are going on around them and in their own lives in ways that they might not otherwise. In fact, I think one of the great advantages of the ABC sequence is it can save children a great deal of trouble by enabling them to learn from the experiences of others without having to have those same experiences themselves. So now I invite you to join with me as I demonstrate the ABC sequence and spend a few minutes with you to discuss how it can be applied and offer suggestions for teaching it. The topic of this video is, what is the most important lesson any child can ever learn? While there's always a risk in using superlatives, in this and the next lesson I will comfortably take the risk, because if this isn't the most important lesson a child can ever learn, I can't imagine what would be. Why? Because there isn't any aspect of a person's life this lesson does not touch. Every choice, every decision, every action a person takes is determined by the processes outlined in this lesson. So what is the lesson? I call it the lesson of the ABC sequence. I'd like to take just a minute and demonstrate to you the ABC sequence. I apologize, my table's a little bit low here, so I'm going to have to bear with me for a minute. I'm taking 3 tennis balls. One marked A, which stands for attitudes. I'm going to put it on the table. I have another ball marked B, which I'm going to put on the table. And B stands for behavior. And then there's a third ball marked C, which stands for consequences. Now, if I take the A ball and roll it into the B ball just right, it knocks the C ball off the table. And what this represents is A, attitudes drive behaviors, and behaviors cause consequences. And the discussion with kids goes something like this. You can control attitudes. You cannot control consequences. So let me go over that again. The A ball represents attitudes, the B ball represents behavior, and the C ball represents consequences. It is a demonstration of the principle that attitudes drive behavior, and behavior causes consequences. We cannot control the consequences. They may and likely will be different than what we intend. The best predictor, however, is the nature of the behavior, and the best indicator of the behavior is the nature of the attitude. One of my cousins was pushed off a porch by a neighbor boy when she was a child, and her neck was broken. She was never able to hold it erect afterwards. Now, it's unlikely that this young boy intended to hurt her so severely, but he did intend to hurt her. So it's the nature of one's attitudes that determine the nature of one's behaviors. As we discussed in a previous video, this is what Benjamin Franklin meant when he said, "Right action cannot be produced without right opinion," and why it behooves us above all things in this world to take care that our own opinions of things be according to the nature of things. Charles Darwin, in his book The Descent of Man, expressed it this way: the highest stage of moral culture is when we recognize we ought to control our thoughts. Whatever makes any bad action familiar to the mind renders its performance so much the easier. Whatever else one may think of Darwin's ideas, It's very difficult to argue with him on this point. In the news, we have recently witnessed the exposure of and succession of incidents of infidelity on the part of a number of prominent individuals, some politicians and other sports figures. Some of these have been with call girls and some with mistresses. What each of these individuals has so publicly experienced as a result of their infidelity has been the ruination of their reputations, their careers, and most seriously, the disintegration of their families. What apparently was intended for pleasure has resulted in pain, not just for themselves but for many others as well. That, of course, is the nature of infidelity. Incredibly, none of these individuals seem to have learned or been able to learn from the experiences of their predecessors. They have had many examples of individuals who have gone before, who've had this difficulty. And herein is a great lesson we can teach our children. When you can learn from the experiences of others, you can usually avoid repeating their mistakes. Indeed, this is probably one of the most valuable lessons we can teach our children, is how to learn from the experiences of others. The ABC sequence is a valuable tool for helping young people learn this invaluable skill, because it not only enables them to recognize the nature of the behavior in others, it helps them to understand the nature of the attitudes driving those behaviors, and they can certainly observe the consequences. And so armed, they are in a much stronger position to avoid those same kinds of thoughts and behaviors in their own lives. And as also we will discuss, the ABC sequence applies to good thoughts and good actions as well. Can you see how the ABC sequence literally applies to every aspect of life, every choice we make and every action we take? And the lesson is also a great example of what I call character-based learning. Our little tennis ball demonstration can also be used to demonstrate Newton's first and third laws of physics, the law of gravity, and kinetic and potential energy. Interestingly, these laws govern the movement of all things in the universe, from atoms and molecules to planets in the heavens, and interestingly enough, including human movement. Understanding the ABC sequence and the principles associated with it empowers children to accept responsibility and accountability for their own choices and actions. The ABC sequence may be used to help young people understand events in literature, history, current events, and even their own personal experience. For example, in the story of Snow White, what was the Queen's attitude? What were her behaviors and what were the consequences? And what about Snow White? What was her attitude? And what were her behaviors and what were the consequences? Another example, if you were trying to help children understand the events of 9/11, these same questions are relevant. What were the terrorist attitudes? What were the behaviors and what were the consequences? And if your children or students are misbehaving and they know the lesson of the ABC sequence, call a halt to all activity and ask them to reflect on what's going on. What behavior are you observing? What attitudes are driving this behavior? And what do you suppose will be the consequences? You don't even need to mention the names of the individuals who are misbehaving. On the other hand, suppose something's going really well. You can pause, call attention to what's happening by saying something like, "Children, we have something really good happening here. Can you recognize it? What's going on? What attitudes are driving this experience? And what are the consequences we're experiencing?" You see, the ABC sequence cuts both ways. And a great example of the positive use of the ABC sequence is the story of how a young slave boy by the name of Frederick Douglass learned to read and write. We will be examining his experience in the next video as I give you my answer to the question, what is the most important skill a young person can develop? If you have found this video interesting and would like to receive other videos in the series on how to select a homeschool curriculum that's right for you and your child, go to www.homeschoolcurriculumfaq.com. Again, that's homeschoolcurriculumfaq.com. And also tell your friends about it. Now, thanks for joining in. I look forward to seeing you on video 17.